We are 10 minutes past the trade deadline as of recording this, so it looks like the trade deadline is over and there's no more buzzer beaters coming in. And the Sacramento Kings, not necessarily surprisingly, they decide to stand pat at the trade deadline. And the Kings not going out and making a big move, that's not surprising at all. I didn't expect them to make a big move. I didn't even really necessarily want or need the big move, but I am surprised and disappointed that a smaller move wasn't made to add on to the rotation. But I totally understand not making the big move because I think other Kings fans kind of always want the big move, but in reality, you can only make so many big moves, and with the amount of assets we have, like one big move probably with the amount of picks and young players that we have. And so you obviously have to be patient in that sense, and you can't just make a move at every possible deadline, being the trade deadline or in the summer. And I still have confidence in this roster as is to be able to make the playoffs. But now, do I have confidence that they can do any more than that? Not really. And for me, the guy that I always wanted, or the type of guy that I always wanted, was like a Royce O'Neal. I talked about him a lot. And the Suns were able to go get Royce O'Neal for 3 second-round picks. And I mean, you look at the Kings spending 2 second-round picks on Chris Duarte. And, I was high on Duarte, taking a flyer on him, but Royce O'Neal, a much more proven guy. And so it would have been nice to have someone like that. PJ Washington to the Mavs. That was probably a bit of an overpay, so I'm, not mad at the Kings for not doing something like that. But you look at Jaden Springer even going for a second-round pick. And so, yeah, I am disappointed that there wasn't one smaller move to add on to the end of the rotation. And no, I'm not counting trading for Robin Lopez and cash considerations and then waiving Robin Lopez as even a small move. That's just like a nothing move to me. Now, there weren't necessarily a lot of teams around the Kings that improved very much. You look at the Mavs, they added Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington for like Grant Williams pretty much. And that makes them better, but I don't think that's the biggest difference on a team like the Mavs with Luka. And then the Suns got Royce O'Neal. But other than that, like teams around the Kings, I mean, there weren't very many big moves at all. What I'm most interested now in is what the Kings do with their open roster spot, because there are guys on the buyout market. You have Spencer Dinwiddie being the biggest name who is getting bought out by the Raptors. I mean, he would be a great addition. Other guys like Daniel House, not necessarily an exciting name. Kyle Lowry, like some guys that aren't as exciting. But then we also have Keon Ellis, who is not eligible to play very many more games and not eligible to play in the playoffs because he's a two-way player. And so I also just think it's interesting about what the Kings will do with the rotation post trade deadline, because I just don't really agree with the rotation that the Kings were running pre-trade deadline. It felt like we had finally set what our rotation was going to be. And then for some reason, Davion Mitchell and JaVale McGee wiggled their way back in to the rotation. And I never really understood that. And the only explanation for like Davion getting into the rotation for me was like, you're trying to up his trade value. And, he had good moments and bad moments, and he just looked like the exact same player. And so my hope moving forward is that we see now more of Alex Len and we see more of Keon Ellis, but that's not really going to happen unless we actually sign him to the roster spot. For me, I think it's just disappointing that not even one small move was made, because it feels like this team is trending towards being a play-in team, maybe making it into the top 6 at 5th or 6th, and then just going out in the first round. And so now it feels like, since we didn't make a move, the goal is just to make the playoffs, and then maybe, depending on the matchup, maybe squeak by the first round if we're lucky. Like, that would be a success. And I think after last season, getting knocked out in the first round, I would hope that the expectations are a little higher. But the growth of a team, it's not always linear. There's no doubt. And the Kings went from being not a playoff team to being the 3rd seed and then, getting knocked out in the first round. I think it does happen a lot with teams where, I mean, you look at the Atlanta Hawks as an example of them going to a conference finals and then just totally regressing after that. And so obviously the front office is looking at the big picture more than trying to keep up with teams this season. And I think that's very logical, but it just sucks as a fan to then have to feel like this season isn't as important, or the expectations of this season have been kind of lowered than what we came into this season thinking. Maybe I've always been talking about being patient, waiting for the right move, letting guys develop, letting Keegan develop, and letting this team grow. But I still think that we probably should have made a move for a wing player that we could have just added on to the end of the rotation. This front office obviously knows that this team is not a championship contender and knows that this team has issues. And I do trust Monte McNair in this front office to improve this team in the future, but we just haven't made any meaningful moves that have actually improved this team for a while now. But now we can move on from this trade deadline and move on from all the trade talk, and we can actually focus on this team and what we're going to accomplish this season. I said after the playoffs last season that maybe it was actually okay that we got eliminated and better that we got eliminated in the first round. Obviously, you don't want to lose, and I would have rather, won and moved on against the Warriors. But in terms of expectations, it was always likely that we were going to regress from the 3rd seed, and if we'd made it past the first round, then that was probably just going to set expectations way too high. And so I think we just have to remember where we came from, being a non-playoff team for so many years, that we can still enjoy this team winning and making the playoffs, even if we don't have the biggest expectations now for what we're actually going to do in the playoffs if we make it there. And this roster has proven that they are good and talented. And when everyone's playing well at the same time, or most guys are, they can go and beat most other teams on any given night. And I think acting like just because they didn't make a move at this trade deadline, that doesn't mean that all these other teams are going to suddenly just start passing us when they didn't even make moves either, because I feel like that's almost how some people are reacting. But anyways, that is it for this episode of the Roll Report. I was hoping there was going to be a little more to talk about, but like I said, we can now move on from all the trade talks and just focus on the group that we have and making the playoffs and trying to win in the playoffs now. So I will see you guys later. Peace.